The rusty hinges of the cabin door screeched as Elaine Carter stepped onto the rotting porch. Her 8-month-old daughter Lily crying in her arms, 8-year-old Daniel clinging to her worn coat. The autumn wind whipped through the valley, carrying the scent of pine and approaching rain. Behind them, the entire Carter family stood in a semicircle like vultures, their expensive cars parked on the dirt road, chrome gleaming in stark contrast to the dilapidated cabin. James Carter, her late husband's older brother, threw his head back in laughter, his tailored suit a silent declaration of wealth and status. "Look at this palace, everyone. Our dear sister-in-law's grand inheritance." His voice echoed across the valley, each word a deliberate knife. Sophia Carter, Thomas's sister, adjusted her designer sunglasses and sniffed the damp air with distaste, the diamond pendant at her throat catching the weak sunlight. One whole dollar's worth of luxury living. Maybe you can rent it out for 50 cents a night. Her perfectly manicured hand waved dismissively at the cabin. The family erupted in cruel laughter as baby Lily wailed louder, disturbed by the harsh sounds. Elaine pressed her lips together, the lines around her eyes deepening. At 55, she had weathered many storms. The loss of her first husband in her 30s, raising Daniel alone, finding love again with Thomas only to lose him to a car accident, and now her ongoing battle with cancer. But the cruelty of his family still had the power to wound her. She'd spent the last of her savings on plane tickets after their family lawyer had informed her of her inheritance, believing there must have been some mistake. Now she realized the mistake had been hers, expecting decency from people who had none. Young Daniel tugged at his mother's sleeve, his small face confused as he pointed through the mountain mist. "Mom, whose mansion is that?" In the distance, barely visible through low-hanging clouds, sat a magnificent structure with towering chimneys and ancient stone walls, a stark contrast to the dilapidated cabin. Michael Carter, the youngest brother, followed the boy's gaze and shifted uncomfortably. "That's Oak Ridge Estate, son. Belongs to some rich family who abandoned it decades ago." His voice lacked the mockery of his siblings, carrying instead a hint of unease. "We've arranged for the utilities to be connected," James added with false generosity. "Consider it our housewarming gift. The cabin has been sitting empty since our grandfather bought this land in the 50s. He never could sell it. Something about encumbrances on the deed, whatever that means." He checked his platinum watch impatiently. "We should go if we want to make our flight." "Elaine, enjoy your new kingdom, Your Majesty," Sophia called out as they piled back into their luxury vehicles. James and Sophia didn't look back, but Michael hesitated, his expression unreadable, before he too disappeared into the convoy of cars. As the dust settled on the mountain road, Elaine stood alone with her children, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. The enormity of her situation crashed down upon her shoulders. She was in a remote part of Massachusetts with 2 small children, almost no money, and nowhere else to go. The cancer treatments she'd been receiving in Chicago would need to be transferred, assuming she could find an oncologist willing to take Medicare in this rural area. She pushed open the cabin door. Surprisingly, it was solid oak despite its appearance, moving heavily on hinges that hadn't been oiled in decades. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight streaming through broken windows, revealing a space that was both better and worse than she'd expected. "At least it's dry," she murmured, setting Lily's carrier down on what appeared to be the cleanest patch of floor. The baby had finally stopped crying and was blinking curiously at her new surroundings. The main room was larger than expected, with a massive stone fireplace that seemed oddly grand for such a humble dwelling. "It's like a pioneer house from my history book," Daniel observed, running his small hand along the wooden wall. "But super old." Elaine set to work immediately, finding an old broom in a corner and attacking the cobwebs that hung from the ceiling like lace curtains. Daniel helped by picking up debris and carrying it outside. Together, they managed to clear enough space in the main room to lay out their sleeping bags. "There's a pump out back, Mom," Daniel called out. And it works. I got water. Small mercies, Elaine thought. At least they wouldn't die of thirst. As evening approached, she focused on making the fireplace usable. The autumn countryside grew chilly at night. She found some dry wood stacked in a lean-to shed and soon had a small fire crackling in the hearth. Daniel explored while Lily slept in her carrier. "Mom, why are these stones different?" He knelt by the foundation, his finger tracing unusual symbols carved into the stone. Elaine joined him, her nurse's eyes trained to notice details, immediately recognizing that these weren't random markings. "You've got a good eye, sweetie. These stones look much older than the wooden structure above." She ran her hand over the symbols, reminded of the medieval manuscripts she'd seen in museums. This cabin might be built on something much older. As night fell and they huddled around the small fire, Elaine opened her backpack and took inventory of their supplies. A few jars of baby food, some crackers, 2 bottles of water, a box of diapers, her cancer medication. It wouldn't last long. Tomorrow she would need to find the nearest town and figure out their next steps. "We're going to be okay," she told Daniel. "This is just temporary, I promise." "I know, Mom," he said, his voice small but confident. "Dad always said you were the strongest person he ever met." Tears pricked at Elaine's eyes. Thomas had been her rock, her partner in everything. His death had left a hole in her heart that nothing could fill. She kissed Daniel's forehead and moved to check on Lily. That's when she noticed something peculiar. The floorboards in the center of the room didn't quite match the others. They were newer, as if they had been replaced to cover something beneath. In the flickering firelight, the difference was subtle, but unmistakable to her observant eye. Interaction point. Have you ever noticed something out of place that led to an unexpected discovery? Continue listening to find out what Elaine discovers beneath those mysterious floorboards. A strange sound echoed from below their feet. Not settling wood, but something like distant footsteps on stone. Daniel sat up in his sleeping bag, his eyes wide. "What was that, Mom?" "I don't know," she whispered, her heart racing despite her attempt to remain calm for her son's sake. "But we're going to find out." Hours later, Elaine startled awake to the sound of something shifting beneath the floor. The fire had died down to embers, casting an eerie red glow across the cabin's interior. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she noticed a faint light seeping through the cracks between those mismatched floorboards. She gently extricated herself from Lily's side and moved toward the strange light. The sound came again, a soft scraping, almost rhythmic, not animal, not wind, something else. "Mom?" Daniel's voice was thick with sleep. "There's a light under the floor." "I see it, honey. Stay with your sister." Elaine's fingers brushed against the worn wood, feeling for edges, seams, anything that might explain the phenomenon. The next morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the broken windows and illuminating the cabin's dusty interior. Elaine had barely slept, her mind racing with questions about the strange sounds and the mismatched floorboards. Daniel, with the resilience of childhood, had eventually drifted off, but Elaine had remained awake, listening intently. The sounds had stopped just before dawn, as had the mysterious light. Driven by curiosity and desperate hope that there might be something of value to sell, Elaine searched the shed after breakfast and found a rusty crowbar among the abandoned tools. With Daniel holding Lily on the porch, safely away from potential debris, she returned to the mismatched floorboards. "Stand back, sweetheart," she warned, wedging the crowbar between 2 boards. "This might splinter." The wood groaned in protest as she applied pressure, then gave way with a sudden crack. Elaine stumbled backward, regained her balance, and peered into the gap she'd created. Instead of dirt or a root cellar, there was only darkness below and what appeared to be a stone step. "Daniel, bring me the flashlight from my bag," she called, excitement overpowering caution. With the small flashlight in hand, Elaine pried up more boards, revealing what was unmistakably a stone staircase descending into darkness. The steps were cut from solid rock and disappeared into the earth beneath the cabin. "What is it, Mom?" Daniel asked, his voice quivering with excitement and fear. "I'm not sure," Elaine replied, "but I think someone built this cabin over something much older." She debated what to do. The responsible choice would be to secure the opening and head into town for supplies. But the mystery beneath her feet pulled at her, and practical concerns like what to do with Lily momentarily faded. "Can we go down there?" Daniel's voice quivered with anticipation. Elaine made a quick decision. She fashioned a secure sling for Lily from her jacket, binding the baby tightly to her chest. "Stay right behind me," she instructed Daniel, handing him the flashlight. "If I tell you to go back up, you do it immediately. Understand?" Daniel nodded solemnly, clutching the flashlight with white-knuckled determination. The stone steps were worn smooth by centuries of use, dipping slightly in the middle where countless feet had trod. Elaine counted 17 steps before they reached the bottom, emerging into a vaulted stone chamber carved from living rock. The air was surprisingly fresh, suggesting some form of ventilation system. Daniel shone the flashlight around, revealing walls lined with faded tapestries bearing a coat of arms. An oak tree with its roots exposed, grasping what appeared to be a golden key. The emblem was repeated in stone carvings and on a shield mounted above what appeared to be an ancient wooden door, now sealed by collapsed stonework. "Oaks," Daniel whispered. "Like Oak Ridge Estate." "Maybe," murmured Elaine, her nurse's mind cataloging details systematically. In the center of the chamber sat an ornate chest of dark wood, bound with tarnished silver. Unlike everything else in the room, it appeared to have been placed there relatively recently, perhaps within the last century. It wasn't covered in the thick layer of dust that blanketed the rest of the chamber. "Should we open it?" Daniel asked, directing the flashlight beam at the chest. Elaine approached cautiously, half expecting it to be locked, but the lid lifted easily on well-oiled hinges. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather that had preserved them perfectly, they found a stack of documents that made Elaine's breath catch in her throat. The top document was a land grant written on vellum, bearing a seal that even with her limited knowledge of American history, Elaine recognized as dating back hundreds of years. Beneath it were property deeds, maps, and genealogical charts, all preserved with obvious care. "What is it, Mom?" Daniel asked, peering over her shoulder. Elaine's hands trembled as she carefully unfolded the documents one by one, laying them on the stone floor. What she found stunned her into silence. Colonial land grants dating to 1698 bearing the seal of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, property deeds for Oak Ridge Estate, and 4,000 surrounding acres. A complete family genealogy tracing the Carter line back to the original settlers. A survey map showing underground passages connecting the cabin site to the estate. And at the bottom of the chest, a modern envelope addressed simply, "To my beloved Elaine." She recognized Thomas's handwriting immediately, and tears sprang to her eyes. With shaking fingers, she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "My darling Elaine," it began in Thomas's familiar script. "If you're reading this, they've given you what they think is worthless. The truth is beneath your feet. Our children's legacy awaits across the valley. My brothers and sister know nothing of our true heritage. My grandfather kept it from them, fearing their greed. Now it falls to you to reclaim what rightfully belongs to our children. Trust no one from my family except perhaps my great-aunt Martha. She knows the truth and lives at Oak Ridge Retirement Home in town. The proof you need is all here. All my love forever, Thomas." Elaine pressed the letter to her heart, a sob escaping her lips. Even from beyond the grave, Thomas was protecting them. But what did it all mean? She looked again at the documents spread before her, their implications slowly dawning. "Daniel," she whispered, "I think your father was trying to tell us something very important about that estate." The following morning, Elaine awoke with renewed purpose. She'd spent half the night studying the documents by firelight, her mind reeling with their implications. If what she'd discovered was true, and the evidence seemed undeniable, then the Carters' cruel joke had backfired spectacularly. After a breakfast of crackers and the last of their bottled water, Elaine packed the most critical documents into her backpack, secured Lily in her makeshift sling, and set out with Daniel across the valley toward Oak Ridge Estate. The ancient property map showed a direct path that wound through the woods, cutting the journey to just under 2 miles. "Are we really going to the mansion, Mom?" Daniel asked, the adventure having lifted his spirits considerably. "We are," Elaine confirmed, trying to ignore the persistent ache in her side, a reminder of her cancer that never quite went away. The path emerged from the woods onto a well-maintained road. What Elaine discovered took her breath away. Oak Ridge Estate wasn't abandoned, as Michael had claimed. It was beautifully maintained, with manicured gardens and a steady stream of visitors lining up at the entrance. Tour buses were parked in a modern lot, and signs directed visitors to a gift shop and cafe. "Is it open to people?" Daniel asked, eyes wide. "It seems that way," Elaine murmured, approaching the main entrance where a ticket booth had been set up against the ancient stone walls. At the entrance, a brass plaque caught her attention. It read, "Oak Ridge Estate, managed by the Historical Preservation Trust. Private ownership disputed since 1943. Daily tours available." Elaine stared at the words, "ownership disputed." It aligned perfectly with what she had discovered in the documents. A legal battle had erupted during World War II when the last known heir had died without children. According to the genealogy charts, Thomas's grandfather had been the rightful heir, but had never pressed his claim, choosing instead to start a new life elsewhere. A woman in her 60s approached, clipboard in hand, looking curiously at Elaine and the children. She wore a tailored blazer with a name badge that identified her as Dr. Margaret Sullivan, Historical Director. "Can I help you?" she asked. "If you're here for the tour, tickets are available at the booth." "Actually," Elaine began hesitantly, "I'm here about the ownership situation mentioned on your plaque. That's a complicated legal matter handled by our solicitors in Boston," Dr. Sullivan replied, her tone professional but guarded. "If you're a journalist—" "I'm not," Elaine interrupted. "My name is Elaine Carter. My late husband was Thomas Carter, and I believe he, or rather, our children, may be the rightful heirs to Oak Ridge." "Carter," Dr. Sullivan repeated, her eyes narrowing slightly. "That name is certainly relevant to the estate's history, but we've had many claimants over the years." "I have documents," Elaine said. When Dr. Sullivan saw the ancient land grant and property deeds, her professional composure cracked. She nearly dropped her clipboard, quickly motioning for them to follow her away from the public area. "Dear God," she whispered once they were inside her private office, examining the documents with a jeweler's loupe she'd pulled from her desk drawer. "These are genuine. The wax seal, the parchment aging, the ink composition, all consistent with late 17th century documentation." She looked up at Elaine with new respect. "Do you realize what this means?" "I'm beginning to," Elaine replied, "but I'd appreciate your expertise." Interaction point. What would you do if you suddenly discovered your family was connected to a fortune worth millions? Are you listening from somewhere cozy today? Let me know in the comments. Dr. Sullivan set down the loupe and leaned back in her chair, her gaze measuring. "This estate has been generating millions in revenue for decades, and legally it all belongs to your children. The Historical Preservation Trust has been managing the property since the ownership dispute began, holding the profits in escrow until the true heir could be determined." Over the next hour, Dr. Sullivan gave them a private tour of the estate, revealing the full scope of what Elaine's children had inherited. The colonial structure was far more than just a historic building. It was a thriving enterprise. The 17th century Great Hall housed priceless American artifacts, attracting scholars from around the world. Portrait galleries displayed original works by Copley and Stewart worth millions individually. Victorian staterooms were rented for weddings at $25,000 per event. The gift shop and restaurant generated $300,000 annually, while film production companies paid $100,000 or more to use the estate as a location for period dramas. Current annual net profit is approximately $4.2 million, Dr. Sullivan explained as they stood on the terrace overlooking the vast estate, all held in trust, accumulating interest, waiting for the rightful owner to claim it. Elaine gripped the stone balustrade to steady herself. The amount was staggering. Just yesterday, she'd been counting pennies for bread, wondering how she would continue her cancer treatments. "There's something else you should know," Dr. Sullivan continued, her voice lowered. "The trust has been fighting off aggressive acquisition attempts for years. A company called Carter Global Investments has been particularly persistent." "Carter Global? That's my brother-in-law James's company." "Indeed," Dr. Sullivan noted. "He's offered to buy the property outright several times, claiming family connection, but never providing documentation like yours. The trust always refused, stating that the property wasn't for sale until ownership was legally established." "He knew," Elaine whispered, the realization striking her like a physical blow. "James knew about the estate's connection to our family. That's why he gave me the cabin. He thought the documents were lost or destroyed." "If these papers check out," Dr. Sullivan said, gesturing to Elaine's backpack, "and I believe they will, your children stand to inherit not just this estate, but one of the largest private fortunes in New England heritage properties." Daniel, who had been unusually quiet during the tour, tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Does this mean we're not poor anymore, Mom?" Before Elaine could answer, her phone chimed with an incoming message, the first since they'd arrived. It was a text from an unknown number. "Saw you at the estate. Big mistake. Some things should stay buried. We'll be taking the children for their own safety." Elaine's blood ran cold as she showed the message to Dr. Sullivan, whose face paled. "I think," the Heritage Director said, "we should call my attorney immediately, and perhaps the police as well." Word spread through the heritage management community like wildfire. By evening, local news vans had gathered at the estate gates, and by the following morning, the story had reached national outlets. "American Widow Discovers Estate Fortune," read one headline. "From dollar cabin to $100 million estate," proclaimed another. Dr. Sullivan had insisted that Elaine and the children stay in the estate's private apartments, usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. "It's safer here," she'd explained. Elaine was grateful for the protection, especially after the threatening text message. The police had taken it seriously, documenting the threat and increasing patrols around the estate grounds. "There's someone I think you should meet," Dr. Sullivan told Elaine the next morning. "Martha Carter. She's Thomas's great-aunt, 94 years old and sharp as a tack. She lives at Oak Ridge Retirement Home in town. Thomas mentioned her in his letter, didn't he?" Elaine nodded, remembering the words. "He said she knows the truth. She's been our most reliable source on Carter family history for years. I'll arrange a visit." Martha Carter sat regally in her armchair by the window of her apartment at the retirement home. Despite her age, her posture was perfect, her white hair elegantly styled, her blue eyes clear and penetrating as she studied Elaine. "So you're Thomas's nurse," she said, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "He chose well." "Thank you," Elaine replied, surprised by the woman's directness. "Thomas came to see me 3 months before he died," Martha continued, her gnarled fingers smoothing the Afghan across her lap. "He'd been researching the family history, discovered the connection to Oak Ridge. I confirmed everything for him." Her eyes grew sad. "He was so excited, said he was going to confront James the next day." "About the estate?" Elaine asked. Martha nodded. "Thomas called me that night. Said he'd found something in the old family Bible that proved everything. Said the cabin was the key. That was the last time I heard from him. She fixed Elaine with a penetrating stare. His brakes didn't fail by accident. Elaine's heart skipped a beat. You think? I know, Martha interrupted. James visited me 2 days after Thomas died. Wanted to know what Thomas and I had discussed. I told him nothing, of course. I've outlived 3 husbands, my dear. I know a snake when I see one. From her drawer, Martha pulled out a small velvet box. This was my grandmother's. Thomas wanted you to have it. I told him to wait, that he should give it to you himself, but she handed the box to Elaine, who opened it to reveal an antique gold locket with the oak tree emblem. It's the key to everything, Martha explained. Wear it when you face them. Let them see that you know. On the 3rd day, exactly as Dr. Sullivan had predicted, the Carter family descended on the valley like locusts. James arrived in a helicopter that landed on the estate's ancient jousting field, the downwash threatening the carefully tended rose bushes. Sophia and Michael followed in a convoy of black SUVs, accompanied by a team of expensively dressed lawyers clutching leather briefcases. From the safety of Dr. Sullivan's office, Elaine watched through the window as they approached the main entrance, no longer laughing as they had been at the cabin. The gold locket from Martha felt heavy around her neck, a physical reminder of her purpose. Shall I meet with them? Dr. Sullivan asked. No, Elaine said. Let them talk to your legal team. I don't trust myself not to say something I'll regret. Dr. Sullivan nodded. Wise decision. The attorneys will record everything. Later that afternoon, security footage showed James in the estate's conference room, his face flushed with anger as he pounded the antique table. This is obviously a hoax, he declared to the assembled lawyers and estate administrators. Those documents are forgeries. My family has been researching our genealogy for years. There's no estate in our lineage. One of the Preservation Trust lawyers, a silver-haired woman with penetrating eyes, slid a folder across the table. These are the preliminary authentication reports from 3 independent experts. The documents are genuine, dating exactly to the periods they claim to represent. Furthermore, we've located corroborating evidence in the county archives. Michael, always the quietest of the siblings, looked increasingly uncomfortable. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, he suggested to James, who silenced him with a glare. Sophia, ever the family diplomat, adopted a different strategy. When the legal confrontation yielded no results, she approached the estate staff, putting on her most sympathetic voice for anyone who would listen. We're very concerned about Elaine's mental state, she told a groundskeeper who had no idea who she was. Grief can make people believe impossible things. We only want to help our dear sister-in-law get the professional help she needs. Her words reached Elaine through the estate staff, who had already formed a protective circle around the new lady of the estate and her children. Daniel had become something of a mascot to the tour guides, who delighted in teaching him about his ancestors depicted in the portrait gallery. But the Carters weren't finished. That evening, Elaine received a call from the family's attorney in Chicago. Mrs. Carter, I'm required to inform you that my clients have filed for emergency custody of Daniel and Lily, claiming you are suffering from delusions and putting the children at risk by dragging them to Massachusetts on a wild goose chase. Elaine nearly dropped the antique phone. They're doing what? The filing claims you're mentally unstable, living in a dilapidated cabin with no running water, and refusing professional help. They're requesting temporary custody until a full psychological evaluation can be performed. The legal battle had begun in earnest, with millions at stake and the Carters willing to use even her children as pawns. Dr. Sullivan found Elaine sitting on the floor of the luxurious guest apartment, tears streaming down her face as Daniel tried to comfort her. It's going to be all right, Mom, he kept saying, his small hands patting her back awkwardly. Dr. Sullivan knelt beside them. Your son is wiser than most adults I know, she said, and he's right. The Carters are terrified because they've just realized they gave away a fortune through their own cruelty. She helped Elaine to her feet, but we're not going to let them win. I've called Professor Edward Thornton. He's America's leading expert on historical genealogy and DNA analysis. If anyone can provide definitive proof of your children's claim, it's him. But the custody filing, Elaine began, her voice breaking, is baseless and won't stand up to scrutiny, Dr. Sullivan assured her, especially once the world sees where you're actually living. She gestured around the opulent apartment. But we need to move quickly. The Carters have money and influence, and they're not afraid to use it. What do we need to do? Elaine asked, wiping away her tears with a determined hand. We're going to need DNA samples, Dr. Sullivan explained. From your children and, if possible, from the Carter siblings as well. Professor Thornton will compare them with samples from the estate's family crypt. The crypt? Daniel's eyes widened. There are dead people here? Many generations of your ancestors, Dr. Sullivan confirmed with a gentle smile, and they're going to help us prove that you belong here. As they formulated their plan, the Carter siblings gathered in the luxury hotel they'd commandeered in the nearby village. James paced the room, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. This can't be happening, he fumed. That gold-digging nobody can't possibly steal what should be ours. Perhaps we should consider a settlement, Sophia suggested, if the documents are authentic. They can't be, James exploded. And even if they are, who's to say Thomas's brats are the rightful heirs? For all we know, she cheated on him. We should demand paternity tests. Michael, staring out the window at the estate silhouetted against the evening sky, spoke without turning around. What if we've been wrong all along? What if grandfather knew about the estate and deliberately kept it from us? James's glass shattered against the wall near Michael's head. Don't you dare suggest that. We're the true Carters. That woman and her children are nothing. As Michael dabbed whiskey from his sleeve, a hotel porter knocked on the door, delivering an envelope bearing the Historical Preservation Trust seal. Inside was a formal invitation. The board of the Historical Preservation Trust requests the pleasure of your company at Oak Ridge Estate tomorrow at 10:00 a.m. for a genealogical presentation by Professor Edward Thornton regarding the definitive determination of Oak Ridge's rightful heirs. Sophia scanned the invitation, then looked up at her brothers with trepidation. It sounds like they found something conclusive. Or they're bluffing, James countered. Get me our PR team. We're going to need to control this narrative before it gets out of hand. Interaction point. Are you enjoying the story so far? Which character do you relate to most? Don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories like this one. Professor Edward Thornton arrived at Oak Ridge Estate at dawn, a compact man with wild white hair and the energetic demeanor of someone half his 72 years. He carried specialized equipment in aluminum cases and was accompanied by two graduate students who treated him with reverent deference. Margaret, wonderful to see you again, he called out to Dr. Sullivan. And this must be Mrs. Carter and the young heirs. He beamed at Elaine and the children. Remarkable story, simply remarkable. Can't wait to get to the bottom of it. Elaine found his enthusiasm oddly comforting after days of tension. Thank you for coming, Professor. I understand you're the best in your field. Oh, the very best, he agreed cheerfully. Now, I've reviewed the documents you sent over, and they're extraordinary. The genealogical charts are particularly detailed, quite unusual for the period. But documents can be forged, even expertly. DNA, however, never lies. Over the next few hours, Professor Thornton and his team set up a mobile laboratory in one of the estate's modernized chambers. They took cheek swab samples from Daniel and Lily, carefully cataloging them in sterile containers. Now for the ancestral samples, the professor announced, leading them down a spiral staircase to the estate crypt. Daniel clung to Elaine's hand as they entered the cool, dimly lit chamber beneath the estate's chapel. Stone sarcophagi lined the walls, each bearing the Oak Ridge crest, the oak tree with its exposed roots, and inscriptions dating back centuries. "We won't need to disturb any remains," Professor Thornton assured them, approaching a sealed glass case containing artifacts. During restoration work in the 1980s, hair and bone samples were preserved from several key members of the lineage, including Jonathan Carter, who died in 1897. According to your genealogy charts, he would be your children's direct ancestor. While the professor worked, Dr. Sullivan gave Elaine a quiet update. "The Carters have confirmed they will attend the presentation. They've brought their own expert, a genealogist from Columbia University, but I'm not concerned. Edward's reputation is unassailable." At precisely 10:09 a.m., the Carter siblings arrived, accompanied by their legal team and a stern-looking woman introduced as Dr. Elaine Harper, their genealogical expert. James refused to look directly at Elaine, while Sophia made a show of asking about the children's welfare with honeyed insincerity. Michael alone seemed genuinely uncomfortable, offering Elaine a small nod that might almost have been apologetic. Professor Thornton commanded the room the moment he began speaking, his academic authority silencing even James's attempts at interruption. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a genealogical mystery spanning 4 centuries," he began. "The Oak Ridge lineage, later known as Carter after a royal decree in 1780 permitted the name change, has been meticulously documented through these records." He walked them through the family tree, pointing out key marriages and births that connected the modern Carters to the colonial earls. Dr. Harper attempted to raise objections about the document's authenticity, but Thornton overwhelmed her with technical details about parchment aging and ink composition that she was clearly unprepared to counter. "But documents, no matter how convincing, are not our only evidence," Professor Thornton continued. "Through DNA analysis, comparing samples from the estate's family crypt with Elaine's children, we have proven beyond any scientific doubt that Daniel and Lily Carter are direct descendants of the original estate owners." He projected a DNA comparison chart that even the lay people in the room could understand, the matching segments highlighted in green. "The probability of this match occurring by chance is less than 1 in 500 million, he declared. "Young Daniel and baby Lily are, without question, the blood descendants of the Oak Ridge Earls." James leapt to his feet. "This proves nothing. Of course they're descendants. We all are. The question is, who has the primary claim?" Professor Thornton smiled patiently. "I was coming to that, Mr. Carter." He clicked to the next slide. "When we compared your DNA profile, obtained from the water glass you used during yesterday's meeting, with the ancestral samples, we found something unexpected." The new chart showed far fewer green segments in James's column. "You, Mr. Carter, along with your sister and brother, are indeed related to the Oak Ridge line, but not through the direct male lineage as young Daniel is. Your connection comes through a female relative who married into the family in 1897. In genealogical terms, you are descendants of a cadet branch, a secondary line with no direct claim to the titles or entailed properties." The great hall fell silent as the implication sank in. Then Dr. Sullivan delivered the final blow. "Moreover, our archivists have made an extraordinary discovery in the estate records. The cabin where you housed Elaine and her children is actually the original gatehouse of Oak Ridge Estate, built in 1698 as the first defensive position of the property. The underground chamber Elaine discovered was a secret vault designed to protect the family documents during times of war." She turned to Elaine. "When you were mockingly given the deed to that worthless property for $1, you were actually given the key to unlocking the entire estate's ownership." More shocking discoveries emerged as Professor Thornton continued his presentation. The estate archives, now fully open to investigation, revealed treasures beyond imagining. Hidden chambers within the estate walls contained colonial gold and jewels worth $12 million. Original manuscripts, including first edition works by Emerson and Thoreau, valued at $800,000 each. Wine cellars with bottles dating to the 1700s, worth $30,000 per bottle. An art collection hidden during World War II, including two lost John Singer Sargent paintings believed destroyed in the Boston Fire of 1906. The total value of these previously undocumented assets, Dr. Sullivan concluded, exceeds $40 million. But the most damning evidence against the Carter siblings came from their own genealogy research. Professor Thornton had obtained access to their private family records through a court order, discovering that they had known all along about their secondary status in the family line. This document, he said, holding up a paper bearing James's signature, is a research commission from 2015 in which you specifically asked historians to find a way to circumvent the primary heir problem in the Carter line. You knew you were from an illegitimate branch with no legal claim to inheritance. Michael stood suddenly. I've heard enough, he said, his voice quiet but firm. James, Sophia, he's right. Grandfather explained this to me years ago. We are descended from the housekeeper's daughter who married a distant cousin. We have Carter blood, but we're not in the direct line. That's why Grandfather was so insistent that Thomas marry someone with impeccable lineage. He was trying to strengthen the primary claim for future generations. James's face contorted with fury. You knew all this time? I thought you knew too, Michael replied. Why else would you have been so desperate to get control of the estate? Why else would you have tried to keep Elaine away? James lunged across the table at his brother, but security personnel intervened before he could reach him. As they restrained James, a small black notebook fell from his inner pocket, landing open on the table. Dr. Sullivan picked it up, her eyes widening as she scanned the pages. This is a record of property transactions, she said. Properties belonging to elderly Carter relatives, all transferred to Carter Global Investments. She looked up at James, who had stopped struggling against the security guards. Did these relatives know they were signing over their assets to your company? The silence that followed was answer enough. I believe, Dr. Sullivan said, we should adjourn this meeting and contact the proper authorities. It appears we may be looking at evidence of fraud in addition to the threatened custody action against Mrs. Carter. As the Carter siblings were escorted from the Great Hall, James and Sophia fuming, Michael with his head bowed, Daniel tugged at Elaine's sleeve. Mom, he whispered, does this mean the estate really belongs to us now? Elaine knelt to look her son in the eyes, aware that their lives had changed irrevocably in the span of a single morning. It seems that way, sweetheart. But more importantly, we've discovered the truth about your father's family, the real truth. Professor Thornton packed away his equipment, beaming with satisfaction. Genealogy is never just about the past, Mrs. Carter, he observed. It's about understanding who we are in the present. Your children are the true heirs of Oak Ridge, not just by blood, but by character. Your late husband would be proud. As Elaine stood in the great hall of what was now confirmed to be her children's ancestral home, she felt Thomas's presence more strongly than she had since his death. The question now was what she would do with this unexpected kingdom that had fallen into her lap, and how to protect her children from those who would still try to take it away. As the court case unfolded over the following weeks, Elaine found herself at the center of a storm that extended far beyond the ownership of Oak Ridge Estate. What had begun as a simple inheritance dispute had mushroomed into an international investigation spanning multiple states. Elaine's lawyer, Rebecca Chambers, a formidable litigator provided by the Preservation Trust, had subpoenaed the Carter siblings' financial records as part of their defense against the custody claim. What she uncovered was devastating. The Carter siblings have been systematically defrauding elderly relatives for years, Rebecca explained during a private meeting in the estate's library. They used forged documents to claim inheritances that weren't rightfully theirs. Dr. Sullivan, who had become Elaine's closest ally, shook her head in disgust. How many victims are we talking about? At least 7 that we can document, Rebecca replied. All elderly Carter relatives, most suffering from dementia or other cognitive impairments. The siblings would visit, present documents that appeared to be investment opportunities, and walk away with property deeds, stock certificates, and other assets. They targeted their own family, Elaine whispered, her nurse's heart aching at the thought of vulnerable elders being exploited. Their own blood. That's what makes it so insidious, Rebecca agreed. The victims trusted them implicitly because of the family connection. I've forwarded all of this to the FBI. They've opened an investigation. Within days, the FBI's white-collar crime division had dispatched agents to interview the Carter siblings, who had retreated to their hotel in the village. Bank records obtained through federal warrants showed they'd stolen over $3.2 million from family trusts and elderly relatives across 3 states. Meanwhile, the custody case against Elaine collapsed as spectacularly as it had been filed. Judge Eleanor Hargrove of the Family Division of the County Court took one look at the evidence and dismissed the case with prejudice, adding a stern rebuke to the Carters for attempting to weaponize the family court system for financial gain. These children are clearly well cared for and deeply loved, the judge noted. The custody petition appears to be nothing more than a shameful attempt to gain control of their inheritance. This court will not be party to such manipulation. With the custody threat neutralized, Elaine could focus on securing her children's legacy. The Historical Preservation Trust formally recognized Daniel and Lily as the rightful heirs to Oak Ridge, transferring control of the estate and its considerable trust fund to Elaine as their guardian. The criminal case against the Carter siblings moved swiftly. Prosecutors coordinated charges, focusing on the most egregious examples of fraud. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged signatures, manipulated bank transfers, and testimonies from caregivers who had witnessed the siblings' visits to vulnerable relatives. In a dramatic courtroom moment that made national headlines, James broke down under cross-examination, trying desperately to negotiate immunity by implicating his siblings. "We thought we were the real heirs," he shouted. "We deserve that money more than some stranger Thomas dragged home." Sophia maintained her innocence until presented with her own signature on forged documents. She actually fainted when the judge announced criminal charges, collapsing in the witness box and requiring medical attention before proceedings could continue. Michael surprisingly offered a full confession and expressed genuine remorse. "I was weak," he admitted to the court. "I knew what we were doing was wrong, but I never had the courage to stand against my brother and sister. I've lived my entire life in James's shadow, afraid to challenge him." His contrition earned him a reduced sentence, 5 years compared to James's 15 and Sophia's 8. But still, the Carter siblings were headed to prison, their reputations and freedom forfeit to their own greed. Throughout the proceedings, Elaine maintained her dignity, refusing to gloat or seek revenge. When reporters asked for her reaction to the sentences, she simply said, "Justice has been served. Now my children and I can focus on honoring the legacy that's been entrusted to us." That legacy was proving to be even more substantial than initially believed. As the estate's archives were properly cataloged for the first time in decades, new treasures emerged. A collection of Revolutionary War correspondence buried in the estate walls during the War of 1812. A previously unknown first edition of the Scarlet Letter found in the library. Correspondence between the 7th generation of Carters and Abraham Lincoln that shed new light on political intrigues of the Civil War era. Academics and museum curators from around the world began requesting access to the collections, bringing renewed prestige to Oak Ridge Estate. Tourism increased by 300% as the dramatic story of the retired nurse who inherited an estate spread through international media. Through it all, Elaine remained focused on creating a stable home for her children. She enrolled Daniel in the local village school, where he quickly became a favorite among both teachers and students. Baby Lily thrived as well, taking her first steps in the estate's rose garden under the watchful eyes of staff who had rapidly become like extended family. Dr. Sullivan in particular had assumed a grandmother-like role, doting on both children and offering Elaine guidance on navigating her new position. "You're doing remarkably well," she told her one evening as they sat in the private family drawing room. "Many people would be overwhelmed by such a sudden change in circumstances." Elaine smiled. "I've spent my life adapting to circumstances beyond my control," she said. "Being a nurse teaches you resilience, if nothing else. The difference now is that I can finally provide real stability for my children." 5 years passed with the swiftness that comes when life finds its proper rhythm. Oak Ridge Estate, once a symbol of ancient nobility, had transformed into something its colonial builders could never have imagined. A living legacy that balanced preservation with purpose, history with humanity. Daniel, now 13, had grown into a thoughtful young man who took genuine interest in his heritage. On weekends, he gave specialized estate tours for children, making history accessible through stories of colonial settlers, secret passages, and revolutionary battles long past. "And this is where they stored weapons during the Civil War," he explained to a group of wide-eyed schoolchildren, pointing to iron rings embedded in the wall of what was now the gift shop. "My ancestors," he paused, still occasionally marveling at the concept, "supported the Union, so they had to hide their best rifles when Confederate sympathizers came north." Lily, at 5 years old, had no memory of the cabin or the struggle that had brought them to Oak Ridge. Born into near poverty but raised in privilege, she raced through halls where her ancestors had once walked, treating ancient artifacts like playground equipment, despite the tour guide's gentle reminders not to touch. Elaine, now cancer-free after successful treatments at a nearby teaching hospital, had grown into her role as the steward of Oak Ridge, with a grace that impressed even the most traditional members of New England heritage circles. Under her guidance, the estate had maintained its historical integrity while evolving into a center for education and community. The cabin still sat across the valley, but now she'd restored it as a reminder of humble beginnings. Its roof had been replaced, windows repaired, and interior renovated to serve as a small museum, telling the story of the estate's gatehouse and its pivotal role in preserving the Carter legacy. Dr. Sullivan, now in her 70s but still vibrant, had remained as the estate's heritage director and had become like family to the Carters. She entered the solar carrying a leather portfolio, her sensible shoes clicking on the stone floor. "The preparations for the Harvest Festival are complete," she announced with satisfaction. The annual Oak Ridge Harvest Festival had become a highlight of the local calendar, bringing together villagers, tourists, and heritage enthusiasts for a weekend of colonial-inspired celebrations. "Daniel is taking his role as host very seriously," Elaine replied, watching through the window as her son directed volunteers in setting up tables on the great lawn. "He'll do splendidly," Dr. Sullivan assured her. "That boy was born for this. He has a natural understanding of the responsibility that comes with privilege." Elaine nodded, pride warming her heart. Despite the extraordinary circumstances of their lives, she had worked hard to keep her children grounded, to instill in them the values that had guided her own life: compassion, hard work, and gratitude. A gentle knock at the door interrupted their conversation. It was Jennifer, Michael's wife, with their two daughters, Sarah and Emma, now 13 and 11. "We're not too early, are we?" Jennifer asked, her smile warm. "The girls couldn't wait to help with the decorations." "Perfect timing," Elaine replied, embracing each of them. "Daniel's been asking when you'd arrive." After Michael's sentencing, Elaine had reached out to Jennifer, offering friendship when the rest of society had turned its back on the Carter name. What began as occasional visits had evolved into a deep bond between the families, the children growing up as cousins should, together. The final scene of their transformation played out that evening at the annual Oak Ridge Harvest Festival. Hundreds of locals and visitors gathered on estate grounds enjoying entertainment that ranged from falconry demonstrations to traditional folk dancing. Food stalls offered everything from authentic colonial bread to modern New England favorites, and children raced across the lawns, flying kites decorated with the Oak Ridge Oak emblem. As Elaine addressed the crowd from the Great Hall steps, camera crews from a documentary team filming a series on historic New England estates captured the moment for posterity. Behind her stood Daniel and Lily, dressed in semi-formal attire that nodded to tradition while remaining appropriate for their ages. "Welcome to Oak Ridge," she began, her voice carrying across the attentive crowd. "5 years ago, when my children and I first arrived here, we were strangers to this land and its traditions. Today, thanks to your kindness and acceptance, we are proud to call this community our home." The crowd applauded warmly. Many remembered the dramatic story of how the retired nurse and her children had discovered their inheritance, and how the Carter siblings' cruelty had backfired so spectacularly. "Oak Ridge Estate has stood for over 300 years, Elaine continued. "It has weathered wars, political upheavals, and changing times. It has been a fortress, a home, a museum, and now we hope a center for learning and community. My children and I are merely the current caretakers of this remarkable legacy, and we take that responsibility seriously." As the formal proceedings concluded and the festivities continued into the evening, Elaine found a quiet moment away from the crowd. Standing on the terrace where she had first learned of her children's inheritance, she gazed across the valley to where the small cabin stood illuminated by the setting sun. The locket Martha had given her hung around her neck, a constant reminder of the journey. Martha herself sat in a place of honor at the festival, having recently celebrated her 99th birthday. "I always knew you'd do right by this place," she had told Elaine earlier. "Thomas chose better than he knew." In that moment, Elaine felt Thomas's presence beside her, as real and warm as if he were standing there in flesh and blood. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered to the evening air. "You knew this would be our salvation." A gentle breeze stirred her hair, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and wood smoke. It wasn't an answer, not really, but it was enough. From a $1 cabin to a multi-million-dollar estate, from desperation to security, from loneliness to community, their journey had come full circle. As darkness fell and lanterns illuminated the estate grounds, Elaine watched Daniel teaching Lily and their cousins a colonial dance he'd learned from the historical reenactors. Her heart swelled with love and gratitude. They had lost much, but gained more than she could have imagined. And somewhere, she was certain, Thomas was watching over them, pleased that his final act of love had led his family home at last.